African Grey Parrot, across the UK, the USA, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and every country where these extraordinary birds are kept, thousands of owners are attempting to breed African Greys right now without the foundational knowledge that determines whether it succeeds or fails completely. Breeding African Grey Parrots is one of the most rewarding things you will ever do as a bird keeper. But it is also one of the most technically demanding, and the difference between success and heartbreaking failure comes down entirely to preparation. The African Grey Parrot is not like breeding budgies or cockatiels. These are long-lived, psychologically complex, hormonally sensitive birds that require a very specific combination of environment, nutrition, bonding, and timing before successful breeding can occur. Most beginners who attempt African Grey breeding without proper preparation end up with infertile eggs, abandoned clutches, poorly developed chicks, or worse, a breeding pair that turns aggressive toward each other or their keeper. Everything in this guide is based on current avian science, the practical experience of successful African Grey breeders across Europe and North America, and the specific physiological requirements of this magnificent and complex species. By the end of this complete guide, you will know exactly how to select the right breeding pair, set up the perfect breeding environment, manage nutrition for optimal breeding condition, understand the egg and incubation process, and hand-rear chicks safely and successfully. Whether you are in the UK working under CITES regulations, in the USA under federal and state guidelines, or anywhere across Europe, this guide gives you the foundational knowledge every responsible African Grey breeder must have before they begin. African Grey Parrots are listed on CITES Appendix 1, the highest level of international protection for any species, meaning that every captive bred bird produced by responsible breeders directly reduces pressure on wild populations across Central Africa. Every healthy captive bred African Grey Parrot produced by a responsible breeder in the UK, Europe, or the USA is a bird that does not need to be taken from the wild. And understanding this responsibility shapes the entire mindset with which serious breeding must be approached. African Grey Parrot pair selection is the single most important decision in the entire breeding process, and getting it wrong produces stress, chronic aggression, failed breeding attempts, and years of wasted effort that could have been completely avoided with correct selection from the start. Both birds in a breeding pair must be fully mature adults. African Grey Parrots do not reach true sexual and psychological breeding maturity until between 4 and 7 years of age, and attempting to breed younger birds produces chronic failure and significant stress for both birds. Both birds must be DNA sexed by a qualified laboratory before any breeding attempt. African Grey Parrots show no reliable external visual difference between male and female, and assuming sex based on behavior alone produces a significant percentage of same-sex pairings. Both birds must have a complete current health certificate from a qualified avian veterinarian, including testing for PBFD, psittacosis, polyomavirus, and internal parasite screening before they are ever placed together in a breeding environment. The ideal breeding pair consists of 2 birds raised in similar conditions, of similar age within a few years of each other, and with no history of significant trauma, prolonged isolation, or chronic stress that might affect their breeding behavior. Never place 2 African Grey Parrots directly into the same enclosure immediately. The introduction process must be gradual, carefully managed, and completely responsive to the body language of both birds, because forced proximity without choice produces aggression rather than bonding. Stage 1 of introduction, adjacent housing, should last a minimum of 2 to 4 weeks, during which the 2 African Grey Parrots learn each other's vocalizations, visual appearance, and smell without any pressure or forced proximity. During the adjacent housing phase, observe both birds closely every single day for signs of positive interest. Mutual preening attempts through the mesh, synchronized movements, contact calling, and feeding simultaneously at the shared wall are all encouraging progress indicators. Stage 2, supervised shared time in a neutral space, begins only when both birds consistently show positive interest signals through the divider, and must be conducted in a room that neither bird has previously claimed as its own territory. True pair bonding in African Grey Parrots is demonstrated by mutual allopreening, regurgitation feeding by the male to the female, and choosing to sit in physical contact with each other voluntarily. These are the unmistakable signs of genuine pair bond formation. African Grey Parrot. The breeding aviary is not simply a large cage. It is a precisely designed environment that must meet the specific spatial, psychological, and physical requirements of a breeding pair, and underestimating the space required is the most common beginner mistake. The minimum recommended breeding aviary for a single African grey pair is 2 meters wide by 1 meter deep by 2 meters tall, and a larger space will always produce calmer, less stressed, and more reliably breeding birds than a space at the bare minimum. The aviary must be positioned in a quiet, low-traffic area. African grey parrots are highly sensitive to disturbance, and a pair regularly startled by loud noises, strange visitors, or unpredictable activity will simply not enter breeding condition. The nest box is the absolute centerpiece of the African grey breeding setup. An incorrectly sized, positioned, or constructed nest box is one of the most common reasons otherwise healthy bonded pairs fail to produce any eggs at all. The correct internal dimensions for an African grey nest box are 30 to 35 centimeters wide by 30 to 35 centimeters deep by 45 to 60 centimeters tall, giving both birds enough space to turn around comfortably inside. Position the nest box in the highest corner of the breeding aviary. African grey parrots in the wild nest in high tree hollows, and a nest box positioned low will frequently be ignored completely regardless of how perfectly matched the pair is. Line the nest box with clean, dry wood shavings. Pine or aspen shavings work well, to a depth of 10 to 15 centimeters, giving the female material to arrange to her satisfaction and providing cushioning protection for the eggs she will lay. Light cycle management is one of the most powerful tools available to African grey breeders. Lengthening the photo period to 14 hours of light per day from late autumn simulates the environmental cues that trigger breeding hormones naturally and reliably. The breeding aviary must be maintained at a stable temperature between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius year-round. African grey parrots will not enter breeding condition in environments that experience dramatic, unpredictable temperature fluctuations. Relative humidity inside the breeding aviary should be maintained between 50 and 60%, particularly important during incubation, as eggs losing moisture too rapidly due to dry conditions develop abnormally and produce weak or non-viable chicks. African grey parrot. Breeding nutrition is one of the most underestimated factors in African grey breeding success, and the research is very clear. Pairs that are nutritionally optimized produce more eggs, more fertile eggs, better quality chicks, and far lower chick mortality than pairs on standard maintenance diets. The base diet for breeding. African grey parrots should consist of 60% high-quality large parrot pellets, 20% fresh vegetables, 10% cooked grains, and 10% high-value protein sources. This ratio is adjusted during active breeding season. 2 to 3 months before the intended breeding season, begin the pre-breeding conditioning period by introducing increased quantities of protein-rich foods, cooked egg, cooked legumes, and soaked sprouted seeds, all trigger breeding hormones naturally and effectively. Calcium is the single most critical nutrient for breeding female African grey parrots. Eggshell formation requires enormous calcium resources, and a female that enters the breeding season calcium deficient will produce thin-shelled eggs, suffer egg binding, or simply fail to lay. Supplement your breeding female's calcium intake through dark leafy greens like kale and spinach, soaked and sprouted seeds, cuttlebone available at all times, and a specifically formulated calcium supplement available from avian veterinarians. Vitamin A deficiency is extremely common in breeding African grey parrots and produces reduced fertility, poor egg quality, chick developmental problems, and increased susceptibility to respiratory infection in both parents and chicks during this vulnerable period. Sprouted seeds are one of the most powerful pre-breeding nutrition tools available. Soaking and sprouting seeds increases their protein content, vitamin content, and digestibility dramatically, while also being highly palatable and attractive to breeding African greys. Water quality becomes critically important during the breeding season. Replace your breeding pair's water twice daily minimum. Use a probiotic water supplement to support digestive health during the high nutrition breeding diet. And check water containers every single day. Offer your breeding. African grey pair. Occasional warm water bathing opportunities during incubation. The female will dampen her breast feathers before returning to the eggs, and this moisture transfer is an essential part of maintaining correct egg humidity during development. African Grey Parrot. When breeding conditions are correct, a conditioned female African grey will begin spending increasing amounts of time in the nest box. Her droppings will increase significantly in size, and her abdomen may feel noticeably fuller than normal to an experienced keeper. African grey parrots typically lay clutches of 2 to 4 eggs, sometimes as few as 1 or as many as 5, with 1 egg laid every 2 to 3 days, and incubation begins in earnest after the 2nd or 3rd egg is laid in the clutch. African grey parrot eggs are white, slightly oval, and typically measure approximately 42 by 32 millimeters. Handle them as little as possible, always with clean dry hands or clean cotton gloves, and never rotate them sharply or drop them. Candling, shining a bright, narrow beam of light through the egg in a darkened room, should be performed at 7 to 10 days after the start of incubation to determine fertility and assess the embryo's development progress accurately. A fertile African grey parrot egg at 10 days of incubation shows a visible network of blood vessels radiating from a dark central embryo mass, with a clear air cell visible at the rounded end of the egg and the developing chick clearly alive inside. An infertile African grey parrot egg, sometimes called a clear egg, will appear uniformly transparent at candling with no blood vessel network or embryo visible. Remove infertile eggs from the nest on day 14 to prevent decomposition contaminating fertile eggs. African grey parrot eggs have an incubation period of 28 days from the start of serious incubation. Both parents typically share incubation duties, with the female taking longer shifts while the male incubates during her feeding and exercise breaks. In the final 48 hours before hatching, the chick will pip through the inner membrane and begin calling from inside the egg. At this point, the female's behavior changes noticeably as she responds instinctively to the chick's contact calls. The decision to pull African grey chicks for hand rearing versus leaving them with the parents is one of the most significant decisions in the breeding process, carrying major implications for the chick's physical development, psychological health, and future temperament as an adult bird. Hand-reared African grey chicks require formula feeds every 2 to 3 hours for the first 2 weeks of life, reducing gradually in frequency as the crop size and overall development progress. The formula temperature must be checked accurately at every single feed. The hand-rearing formula must be served at exactly 41 to 43 degrees Celsius. Formula too cold causes crop impaction. Formula too hot causes severe crop burns that can be fatal. Temperature accuracy at every single feed is absolutely non-negotiable. African grey parrot chicks begin the weaning process at approximately 10 to 14 weeks of age. This is a gradual transition from formula dependence to fully independent eating that must be managed carefully to ensure complete nutritional security throughout the entire process. During weaning, always offer a wide variety of soft foods alongside the reducing formula feeds. Cooked rice, soft fruit, scrambled egg, finely chopped vegetables, and soaked pellets encourage independent eating without creating nutritional gaps during the transition. Never force wean an African grey chick by abruptly stopping formula before the chick is eating solid foods confidently and independently. Premature weaning produces underweight, nutritionally deficient, and psychologically stressed birds that perform poorly throughout their entire lives. African grey parrot breeding in the United Kingdom is subject to CITES Appendix 1 regulations. Every chick produced must be registered with an Article 10 certificate before it can be legally sold, transferred, or used commercially in any way whatsoever. In the UK, African grey parrots must be rung with an appropriately sized closed ring before they are old enough for the ring to no longer be removed. This ring provides the traceability evidence that distinguishes legal captive-bred birds from illegally traded wild-caught birds. In the United States, African grey breeders must comply with both federal regulations under the Wild Bird Conservation Act and applicable state-level exotic bird regulations. Requirements vary significantly by state and must be verified with the specific state's Fish and Wildlife Agency. Across the European Union, African grey breeding is regulated under EU wildlife trade regulations equivalent to CITES Appendix 1, with each member state having specific documentation and registration requirements that breeders must fulfill before any birds are legally sold. Breeding African grey parrots responsibly means committing to the lifetime well-being of every bird you produce, carefully vetting every buyer, providing comprehensive aftercare guidance, and remaining genuinely available for support throughout the bird's entire 50-year life. The African Grey Parrot is a bird that deserves only the most committed, most informed, and most responsible breeders, because every bird produced carries a 50-year life ahead of it. And the quality of that life begins with the decisions made in the breeding aviary. Begin with the right pair, build the right environment, deliver the right nutrition, manage the breeding season with precision and patience, rear your chicks with genuine skill and care, and the African Grey Parrot will reward your commitment with one of the most remarkable experiences in aviculture.